at the home of the legendary jazz NEA jazz master and legendary jazz artist, Dr. Randy Weston. How you doing, brother?
Good, Eric. How are you?
Oh man, it's just fine. It's a pleasure to be here with you at your home.
Thank you.
And to be in your midst.
Thank you, sir.
You have meant so much to so many. It is just, we have to write a book, another book, a book like you wrote, to really quantify all the wonderful things you have done for people. And I want to ask you something. Very, very simple question, and probably everybody in the world is asking, but I want to ask you this. Why do you play music?
I play music because I grew up with music. I grew up in a neighborhood in Bedford-Stuyvesant. My mother and father, they brought the best music in the house. They might bring a spiritual, they might bring an opera, they might bring a big band, they might bring a quartet. So we grew up with music coming from our parents. And they would take us to the Apollo Theater. They had the big bands. So you see, and the whole neighborhood was like that. Nobody had money, but almost everybody had a piano, and everybody in the neighborhood had to take dance, trumpet, violin, piano, and you gotta do art. Yeah. And so as kids, we'd be playing ball, talking about who's better, Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young. At 15, 14 years old, I would even think about being a musician.
How is playing music now different from when you were playing music way back then?
I realized the importance of our ancestors. I realized what happened in the early part of the 20th century, late 19th century. What those giants did to create this music that we play. For example, when I go to the piano, Duke is there with me, Monk is there with me, Tatum was there with me, Count Basie is there with me, because they gave us a foundation. So to be able to grow up and see and hear a Louis Armstrong, to go see a Coleman Hawkins, to go to Max Roach's house where I met Dizzy Gillespie, where I met Miles Davis, where I met Charlie Parker. Max Roach made me play for Charlie Parker, and I was like this. You see, so even the kids in the street have got me shining his shoes, whistling a Charlie Parker solo. So our music is not jazz music, our music is African music of our African people. Going back to the motherland itself, we are music. That black church on Sunday, that was my second school. First school, my mother's womb, but she was listening to when she was carrying me. That black church, you got to be there every Sunday, but you got that powerful African American music. So I had to go to the motherland and realize we're doing here what our ancestors did 5,000, 6,000 years ago, but we don't realize it. So therefore, people like Max Roach, people that they become more important today than they did 20, 30 years ago. Louis Armstrong today, somebody said, Randy said, who would you like to record? I said, I'd love to record with Louis Armstrong. They said, what? Yeah, because Duke Ellington said, there's no such thing as old music. No such thing as modern music. He said Louis Armstrong was a modern trumpet player. Nobody got the sound of Louis. Nobody got the sound of Coleman Hawkins. Yeah. So now I'm in love with my ancestors, man. I wake up in the morning, I put on Jimmy Lunsford, I put on Art Tatum. How do you do that in the 20s? Where'd that come from?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So Randy, reading your book, it is so interesting. Every chapter is different. And I just, there's so many things. Tell me about your dad's barbershop. Remember that?
You talking about some serious roots.
Oh yeah.
Well, my father, very independent guy. Jamaica, Panama, New York, right? Mm-hmm. My mother, Virginia. I'm born in Brooklyn, so I got all the roots. I got all the variations of African food, music, dance, laugh, language.
Oh, goodness.
I grew up with that thing, the neighborhood. So my daddy always wanted me to be independent. He said, you be independent of this racist world that we live in. You have to have your own business, whatever. So he had the barbershop. Barbershop was on Sumner Avenue, which ironically now is Marcus Garvey Boulevard. And my father, he was a follower of Marcus Garvey, but he never got to see the change. But it was Sumner Avenue, days and whatnot. So in the barber shop, I found hired some barbers, you know. And ironically, right next door was Cecil Payne's father had a tailor shop. And we would share the same toilet. That's how connected the two places were, you know. So Cecil, he'd be there pressing the clothes and whatnot. I'd be shining shoes and learn how to cut hair a little bit like that. But my father was the kind of man, as long as I remember, wherever he saw my father, he would talk about Africa. He would talk about it in the restaurant, he would talk about it in the barber shop. He would go to the United Nations, my father would talk about Africa. That's all he talked about. And when I was between 3 and 6, I forgot. He said, my son, I will tell you one thing, never forget. He said, you are African, born in America. And you have to study the great African empires before Africa was colonized and invaded from the north. So going in Brooklyn, I go to libraries, I read about the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Nubia and Ghana and Songate. Wow. He said, this is our Timbuktu. He said, this is us. The period in Egypt, we beat them. So he started like that. He had a finger, my father. Strong guy. There he is right there. Mr. Weston. Oh, man. Woo!
Wow.
You talking about fire.
Man before his time.
Yeah.
And very intelligent.
He was really a revolutionary guy.
Wow.
Yeah. So he gave me maybe 2 most important things in my life. He made me take piano lessons. Particularly when I was about 12, I was 6 foot tall. I thought I was going to the circus. Because in them days, today that ain't nothing. And I wanted to play football and baseball and that type of stuff. My father said, no, you're going to study the piano. He said, because if you play the piano, you can play without anybody. You study the piano. And he gave me Africa, my father. So he said, when you go out there, you go out the house, when you go to school, when you go on the street, you're going to be smothered with lies. You're going to face a mountain of lies. Describe it. Just see a mountain, lie.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about Trump and lie. Trump is lightweight. The country was created on lies. That we are inferior people, that we have no history. So Pop made sure I was strong. So when I went out there, that racist world couldn't say anything to me. I was proud of my color, proud of my skin, proud of my mother and father, proud of my people. And I saw the pain that they were all going through by being black. I can remember where the Billie Holiday Theater is now. That used to be Sheffield Farms. And we were kids, we would go there to watch the conveyor belt of the milk. I can remember that an African American driving a truck was like a CEO. I remember the first African American at Con Edison, and he was very light and cold. And we couldn't go here, we couldn't go there. But they kept us spiritual, they kept us cool. Nobody had money, but we had so much love. And that's why I wrote a song called African Village, Bedford Stuyvesant. I grew up in an African village in Brooklyn. And by living in Africa, I told the truth. We are an African people. Wherever you find us, whether it's Brazil or Cuba or Venezuela or Trinidad or Jamaica, wherever you find us, you see that African pulse is there. We have music for the Creator. Wherever you find us. I've been to Fiji Islands. All places discovered African people in Fiji. But the connection is the pulse. All of our music swings. All of our music is spiritual. And whatever we come in contact with, my dad would bring people from South Carolina over there. He'd go down and take the sharecroppers in his car and bring them up here. They'd be chasing them sometimes, what he used to do. He was a fighter, yeah. And he brought up a guy one day from South Carolina. This guy took a knife and fork and gave me a concert. I was a boy. But when I went to Africa, Africa created that. So in other words, we never left the motherland, and that's the biggest secret that we just don't know. Yeah. So I was blessed having a Max Roach, having my U.B. Blake on Stuyvesant Avenue. I go to my U.B. Blake's house. U.B. Blake told me what happened in Baltimore in 1880, so and so. Because see, we were young, we hung out with the old people because they had the wisdom. They didn't have the white man's education, but they had the wisdom. So when we were kids, we hung out. Now Max Roach is only maybe 4 or 5 years older than me, but he was still an elder. U.B. Blake was almost 100. And I go to his house and he tell me all the stories. And I say, oh, wow, how did we create this music? How is it possible people coming from Africa like this? To use imagination, come like this and take this and do this and do this and do this. How did that happen? Nobody answered that. When they said Stephen Foster, when he was listening to the songs when our ancestors were in slavery, he'd write songs, listen to the way we sang and whatnot. But we kept 3 basic sounds, African people. And they mixed us up during the time of slavery so we couldn't speak our traditional language, right? And we couldn't speak English, French, or Spanish, or nothing. We only had our dialect. Right? But one language we spoke was music. So the original revolution was the spiritual and the blues. And that's how our ancestors, and they used the drum. They take that drum and send messages, which the Western society said that was inferior. That's some advanced stuff, man. They were so afraid of the drum, they outlawed the drum in this country. This drum. Why? Because it wasn't just a musical instrument, it was a language that we use in Africa thousands of years ago. Yeah. So for me, discovering our people, man, I'm like 3 years old. I'm just a baby trying to understand our spiritual power. Our grandma, great-grandma, my father said to me, you love your great-great-grandmother who you never saw, who was on that boat and across the Atlantic Ocean in chains, but she had to survive to produce you. See, you folks give me that real thing. So my father taught me to love ancestors who I never saw and love them with all my heart. And the people, other people in motherland, they say that people like Ellington and people like James Reese Europe, these people were early part of the 20th century. How do you keep an orchestra for 45 years? How do you write between 3,000 and 5,000 compositions? How do you be so suave like Ellington? He was also a painter into African history. Where do you find a Paul Robeson and people like this who sang and said, wherever I go in the world, I'm proud to be an African. And you go on and on. Where do these people come from? But in the motherland, they say that the Creator sends certain people down to lift our spirits when we're down. And our people, everything happened to us. Your skin is no good, your hair is no good, your feet are too big, you name it, you're not even a human being. We're brought here, what they call 2/5 of a human being, we're even human. See, my partner let me know everything the European has came from Africa, but they left out the spiritual part. And we are the spirit power in America. If you take away what you call blues and jazz and hip hop and all that stuff, this country is nothing. So it's the African people who created this powerful culture of love, of healing. You know, you go and hear Billie Holiday, man, you cry. You hear Mahalia Jackson, you cry. Well, it's the same music. It's all African music in the United States. That's the reason why my book is called African Rhythms. Because jazz does not describe the ancestors. Jazz is a jazz magazine, jazz clubhouse, but even I talked to the artists, I said there's no category. You don't have category in music. So Duke would write for the Queen of England. You could hear the blues underneath. Yeah, you know what I mean? Wherever we go. Duke Ellington came to Senegal in 1966 when they had the first World Festival, African Festival. And when Duke got off the plane, he came down suave, class. They said, Mr. Ellington, they said, what you think about African music? He said, I've been playing African music for 35 years. So the secret for us is to go back to our ancestors. They had the wisdom, they had the courage, they had the pride. They knew the importance of the music. Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Lewis, Adam Clayton, all these people, all into the music. But today our leaders are asleep. And this music that we call jazz is the classical music of the United States of America. The classical music.
To our viewers out there, if they haven't had the chance to pick up the autobiography of Randy Weston, African Rhythms, by all means, go online, Google it, Google Randy Weston, and pick up this book. I mean, so many interesting things that Randy talks about. You know what? First, I got so many things going through my head that I want to ask you about. You mentioned the fellow, the sharecropper that played the fork and the spoon and played the whole concert for you, and he started using his body, and we were calling that, when I grew up, we were calling that ham bone.
Of course. We call it a ham bone.
Yeah, ham bone.
Yeah.
And that's where it came from, Africa.
Everything comes from Africa. We are an extension of the great African empires. Mother Africa is the most powerful continent on the planet. You can take all the continents in planet Earth. They don't have the diversity of Africa. It's the most diverse place, man. Diverse. Animals, insects, mountains, Sahara Desert, you name it. And the music that's created in Africa, it describes Africa itself. Africa is a continent of magical spiritual power. When I hear Monk playing the piano, I hear magic. When I first heard Monk, I said I heard ancient Egypt 5,000 years ago. People thought I was crazy. Because we have a magic in us. But we have a magic of the motherland, which is so powerful. Despite the fact we've taken away, it never left us. And I feel when we recognize our heritage, that we'll be a stronger people, we'll love each other more, and we'll appreciate what we've accomplished. And once we respect and love our great ancestors, and we study the history of this music, and what we call jazz, we should be so proud because it's the only new music of the 20th century. Only new music. Europe had its period of 400, 500 years with Bach, Beethoven, Stravinsky, all that stuff. But we, the daughters and sons of slavery, taken away from motherland, come here like this and create this music. So that's why I said to everybody, I said, when I touch the piano, it's no longer a European instrument, it's an African instrument.
You know what? And I have to mention this. Okay, we play this music, but you're the only one that I ever heard in my life. Anybody that I ever know. You actually had a jazz club in the Middle East.
It wasn't a jazz club.
It wasn't a jazz club.
It was an African Rhythms Club.
African Rhythms.
And that was in Tangier, Morocco. And in that club, I had some time blues band from Chicago. I have some singers from the Congo. My son would play as a dean with Moroccan musicians. So the club was global Africa.
And you know what else? In the last 10 years, I've been keeping up with you. And you have been the most documented, celebrated artist, I don't know what to say, jazz artist or African rhythms artist, in the last 10 years. You've written books, autobiographies, you had so many recordings. You've done documentaries, you've been in all of the magazines, the newspapers, you've been on TV, been on radio, you've been hot. And usually you find that for, artists, when they come up, make their name in their career, early in their career and so forth. But your career has extended over half a century.
More.
more than a half century, and right now you are the hottest artist out here. You know, you're the hottest jazz artist out here. You've been on the cover of so many magazines, and so no one has had the what would I say, the impact that you had in the last decade.
Thank you. Well, you know, Eric, as I told you before, I have been programmed. Many of these things I never arranged. To create an ancestor, to create a programming. My father programmed me when I was a little boy. Love Africa. Love your ancestors. Love your elders. So when we grew up, we was always with the old people. Those are things as old people. You go to Africa, the elders are very important. Grandma, grandpa, great-grandpa, you see. So things happen to me, I'm amazed. When I read that book, I'm amazed. Because see, usually you can say, well, I did this and I did that. My brother, many of these things come directly from the ancestors and the Creator. It's like moving a piece. This is what's happened to me.
That's amazing. And you know, one of the things I was going to ask you, when you started playing this music, did you ever dream or imagine that it would come out like this, the way it has come out? Did you?
You saw in the book my first piano teacher.
Yes.
You remember that story?
Okay. Well, let us tell us.
Mrs. Chapman, right? In them days, piano teachers would come to the house, give you a piano lessons. And my father liked that, you know. And somehow, them old people, even when you're studying European classical music, they could tell when you made a mistake. I used to wonder about that. So after she gave me a lesson, I'd be telling my father, say, do that again, that don't sound right. He ain't never had a music lesson in his life, right? After 3 years, I'm serious. The piano teacher went to my father and said, Mr. Weston, save your money. Your son will never play the piano. And it's a true story because I was so tall for my age. I wanted to play baseball and football with the kids. I didn't want to sit just some scared. My father got another piano teacher who knew a couple of popular songs. And so I learned I was destined for this to happen. I had no idea I was going to be a musician. I didn't become professional until I was 29 years old. I've been making local gigs from the time I was 17. But you have to understand, I grew up with people like Bud Powell, people like Hook, people like Art Tatum, Earl
Bud
Hines,
Powell,
Nat King
Monk,
Cole,
Art Tatum,
yeah,
Earl
Gardner, all them kind of people.
Nat King Cole.
You understand what I'm saying? So you thought I'm gonna be a piano player with them brothers?
Oh, God.
Wait until I was 29. Did my very first recording with Sam Gill from Brooklyn, bass player, 1954. I did all Coldplay. That's what the recording was, my first recording for Riverside, their first recording as an artist, because before that, they would record piano rolls. So in those days, you had those piano rolls, so you could look at the piano rolls, you could look what Fats Wallace was doing with the piano rolls, you know, James P. Johnson, all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Now, was that at the same time, remember you mentioned in the book where you would go somewhere, was it upstate or somewhere?
Berkshires.
Berkshires, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, what was that experience like?
Everything. Everything. I was in the Army for 3 years. I was in Okinawa for 1 year. Come back home. The same racist conditions for our people. My dad, by this time, had a restaurant. He switched from a barbershop to a restaurant 1 block away from where on Sumner Avenue. So when he cooked that, he had to be independent. So you want to work for nobody. You have to be independent in this country. You know? So when I got back from the Army, this restaurant, I should say luncheonette, put it bestly, this luncheonette was between a bar and a liquor store. So when I came back, that's when the powers that be decided to destroy us as the people with that heroin. What's happening today all over, they put that stuff first on us. Okay. Most of the people, as I said before, if you drove a truck, you were a CEO in them days. African American people were domestics. They did the worst of everything, right? So in the restaurant, then the heroin came, and I started to lose a lot of people through alcohol, through drugs, despair. To be black was very difficult, very hard. Plus the lynching, all that stuff in the South, Emmett Till, all that stuff is going on. A basketball player named Lefty Morris. Lefty was that generation of Max Roach, right? And they used to come to the restaurant, so he saw that I was really down. I was really down because you 3 years in the army, you figured maybe it was a racist army, but maybe when we come back, the conditions might change. Plus, people be stagnant, drunk, alcohol, just a very depressing time for the people. He said, man, I said to him, I want to get out of here. He said, you go up to the Berkshires. He was a semi-professional basketball player. He said, you go up to Berkshire, Lenox, Mass, Great Barrington, that area. He said, they have these fantastic music festivals, all kinds of music. Go up there, take any kind of job, just get out of Brooklyn. I went to my mom and dad, I said, I have to go, I want to go. So I went up there, and those days it was hard for black people to stay at hotels, even up there. So you'd have the sisters, usually, which was true all over the South. When they're making them tours, you can't stay in no hotels, but you have these black houses that would welcome the artists, cook them food, all that stuff. So there was a woman up there. So I met the woman who was in charge of the travel agency. She was a white American woman, Mrs. Barton, I forget her. He said, you go see her, take any kind of job. So I went up there and I said, I'm looking for some work. She said, Mr. West, I own everything now. I'll put you up at this house and I'll get you some work, So I stayed in this house about maybe a week. System. In them days, man, them houses with the sisters and biscuits and keep that tradition going, although you're away from home, right? So finally she got me a job at a resort in Great Barrington, owned by a guy, I think he was a high school teacher in Brooklyn or something. So I went there. I cut down trees. I was a dishwasher. I was a chambermaid for a while. Everything to stay up there. Because by this time, the whole area is music area. Lenox, Mass was not far away. They had the Boston Symphony Orchestra 7 weeks of the year. All the students from all over the world come there and study chamber music, classical dance. It's a big area for music, but especially European music, but the best. Lucas Foss, Aaron Copland, Leonard Bernstein, all those people up there. So anyhow, when my work was finished at the place we call Great Barrington, I took the bus and got another job in Lenox, Mass. Lenox, Mass is where everything was happening. One day, I'm washing dishes with two young girls from Central Europe. They still had concentration marks on their arm. We said, we hear there's some jazz at a place called the Music Inn about 3 miles from here. Would you like to go? I said, yeah, because I used to play piano when I was off.
Well, hold up now. You said they had concentration camp?
Mark, yeah.
Mark
from Hitler.
From Hitler?
The Jews, they would have numbers on their arms, named Hella and Vera. So he said, look, you want to go here? Said, we know you like jazz. Come on. So we walked through the forest, 3 of us, we got to this place called the Music Inn. There's Professor Marshall Stearns, did the first storybook on jazz. He was doing a class in this resort called the Music Inn. We had about 200 people there, all from New York, Boston, all people into music. But he started a concept at the Music Inn of African culture worldwide. So when I went up there, he was demonstrating to the people, I want you all to hear King Porter Stomp, the favorite song that time. I want you to hear Fletcher Henderson's arrangement. I want you to hear Benny Goodman's arrangement. I want to see whether you can tell the difference. That's how I met this guy. I stayed up there every summer almost 10 years. Up there, who did I meet? Olatunji, Candido, Langston Hughes, Mahalia Jackson, Professor Willis James of Spelman College in Georgia, who knew the first three sounds of African people during the time of slavery. And on the plantation in the cotton fields, he had certain sounds that we would do. The foundation, what we call the blues and the spiritual. This is our first revolution. Before we could speak those languages that they call European languages. So I met Butterfly McQueen, who was one of the original actors. I met Dan Burley from the Pittsburgh Courage. So what he would do, I met John Lee Hooker.
Now, Butterfly McQueen was in that famous movie.
Over the Wind, maybe? I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
But Marshall.
Clark Gable was in it.
Clark Gable, right? Plus Marshall brought Jeffrey Holder from Trinidad. He brought black musicians from Brazil. So up there, I would talk to everybody. And the whole Pan-African concept only confirmed what my father had given me originally. So what Marshall would do, he had a big chart like this. On the chart, he'd have African music. He'd have a John Lee Hooker or Mamie Smith, etc., etc., etc. So as it turned out, he knew up to Bud Powell, but he didn't know about Monk. Now by this time, I was playing a little bit like Monk. When I first heard Monk Coleman Hawkins, I said, that's my man. He's got that sound. He's got that thing on the piano. Different. That's just my man. So anyhow, I met him and we talked. I'm still washing dishes at the other place now. Ended up going to the resort, music here, ended up being a breakfast cook and playing the piano with me. So he said to me, well, I'm going to do the history of jazz. We're going to start with Africa. We're going to go to the Caribbean. We're going to go to the black church. We're going to do the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, up to Africa. Which means Africa is the past, Africa is the future, and Africa is the present and the future. This is what my father told me all the time. Right? I see it today. I see it today. So anyhow, he said, let's do a history of jazz together at the schools. Oh, I know. He only knew about Bud Powell. He didn't know about Monk.
Right.
I said, you know about Thelonious Monk? He said, no. So I had some of Monk's music, and I played a little bit like him. So he said, okay, let's do the history of jazz together. Marshall Stern's got two dancers from the Savoy Ball, Al Mendley on Jane, going back to the cakewalk, going back to the early dancers in this country. Like Ruth Brown said, they didn't know how to dance. We had to teach them how to dance. And I got a call from the State Department. We'd like you to tour Africa. At the time I was in between, because the racism was still powerful there. And when you do those State Department tours, you have to present the best of America. That's what you represent, okay? But they knew my interest in Africa because I had all this experience hearing Mahalia Jackson doing a class on African spirituality in the black church, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And me, I took something from her. I took something from Duke, something from Monk. I grabbed what I kept from these people because they were our giants and that was our royalty. They created something that never happened before. Yeah. So from that point on, I did the State Department tour. Did 14 countries in Africa. 1967, I had Clifford Jordan, Ed Blackwell, Ray Copeland, Bill Wood, and my son, and Chief Bay.
Chief Bay.
Yeah, and I had my son who was 15 years old as a me. And we spent 3 months traveling in Africa. So wherever I went in Africa, I asked the State Department, wherever we go, I want to find the oldest people I can find in Africa. I want to hear the oldest music I can find, the oldest. So that meant in most countries, we were exposed to the traditional music of the country. And we hear this traditional music.
I'm just so glad you mentioned Chief Bay.
Yes.
We played together for about 4 years here.
Okay. Right.
And he was just so great.
Yeah.
So great.
Fantastic, man. And that's how I met Kofi Garba, Guy Warren. We were in Ghana for 1 week performing. Yeah. But the whole point is I found out the power of the music of Africa, where we come from. Now we think we're great, and we're great. But when you go to the motherland and you hear the tradition of music, because they're in touch with the universe. They're in touch with the planets. They know the diatonic scale comes from each planet. Each planet got its own sound, each planet got its own rhythm. They knew the original musicians were the birds, and the animals, and the insects, and the sound of the wind, the sound of the forest. Mother Nature is the original orchestra. Our ancestors listened to Mother Nature to create music in the first place. All musical instruments were made out of Mother Nature. With the skin of a goat or skin of a cow or from a tree or whatever, or the throat of a camel. All the music was made from nature of Africa itself. And by doing that, the music is so spiritually powerful because the music describes the motherland. And there's no place on the planet Earth like Africa. No place like this place. So when I go to motherland, I'm always looking for the old people, because the old people, they lived before the European arrived. So they taught me about music, the African way, the spiritual power of music, made me better understand Eric Frazier. Made me better understand Chief, made me understand Randy Weston. I said, we come from the great African empires. All we have to do is claim what's ours. We have to take nothing from anybody else. We created music. We created science. We created astrology, painting, sculpture, musical instruments. All come from Africa.
I can see it. Maybe the viewers out there already see it as well. But what makes you tick? What makes you do the things you do? Where does that gusto, that spirit come from?
Love. And we go and hear Max Roach and Dizzy and Monk. It's love. Head of the Sudanese ballet, a violinist, ethnomusicologist. I met him in Nigeria. So I said to him, his name was Mahi Ismail. We spent time together during Miriam Makeba's concert in Nigeria in 1977 when they had a big festival. 20,000 artists in 1 month from all over the world. Aborigines from Australia, Sudan, Congo, Mississippi, we're all looking at each other, dressed differently, speak different languages, and all the villages were next to each other. So the end of the concert ended with Miriam Makeba, Stevie Wonder, and Osabisa. That was the end.
Oh, Osabisa, one of my favorites.
Right. So what we said was this. We said, hey, all our music is different, but it's all the same.
So now Osabisa was one of the forerunners of the Afrobeat genre they talk
exactly.
about. Yes.
That was the last concert. After 1 month, all these people, we all said, hey man, we're doing the same thing. We're doing Africa. But we are diverse because Africa is diverse. The most diverse place. Getting back to Mahi. I said, Mahi, why am I so in love with Africa? He said, Africa is not the geographical area that it occupies. He said, Africa is not the people that live there. He said, Africa is not the Sahara Desert. Africa is not Mount Kilimanjaro. Africa is not the forest. All that stuff. I said, what is Africa? He said, Africa is the spirit of our ancestors. And when they choose you, you can be in Stockholm, you can be in Buenos Aires, you can be in New Orleans, you can be in Brooklyn. When they choose you, you fall in love with Africa. You respect and love what is Africa, and you do everything you can to find out about your heritage, so you can pass it on to the next generation, so our children can be proud and realize a really advanced civilization, we got to go back.
Leopold Senghor and Aimé Césaire, who talked about that Africa, and they call it like a concept of negritude, that wherever Africans are all over the world, it's that spirit. Exactly.
We never left the motherland, because the motherland is spirit. Music is spirit. You can't see music. You can talk about it, but when your words don't describe the music itself. Because music is our spiritual language. Music is what the Creator gave us. First trip, 1961. 29 of us, including Langston Hughes, Nina Simone, Ahmed Abdul Malik, Hale Woodruff, Martha Flowers, Lionel Hampton. 29 of us, we spent 10 days in Lagos to see what was the relationship between African Nigerian and African Americans. We had Natalie Hinderas, who was a classical singer in African American music, Dr. Hunter, 20 intellectuals, musicians. Mm-hmm. So again, I wanted to find out about the music. Mm-hmm. So after all the conferences and the seminars, for example, first time and only time I played with Lionel Hampton was in Nigeria. And I had Booker Irvin with me and Scobie from Brooklyn. Oh, yeah. I brought Scobie and Booker Irvin. Mm-hmm. And we joined Lionel Hampton's band, because he only had 8 members of his band. So I only played one time like in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. So after all the conferences and blah blah, painting, sculpture, what's the similarity? I would go hang out in the clubs. That's what I would do. Now there was a club in Lagos called the Cabin Bamboo, owned by a Nigerian named Bobby Benson. Bobby Benson was incredible. He played the most incredible guitar I ever heard. The guitar is an African instrument anyhow, the banjo, whatever. Mm-hmm. This guy would play. He was a great drummer. And he owned this club called the Cabin Bamboo. So what had happened, during the week, they would play the high life music, right? So the clubs were like huge circles, open air, right? And people come and dance and whatnot. So again, my first time in Africa, which I felt at home. Once we landed, I was home, man. I had no problem. I never left the motherland. So I was sitting there watching. On the weekend, he would bring up traditional people. So this particular weekend, I was there, and he brought these traditional people in Nigeria. I don't remember where from. They had a huge balafon, huge like this, huge.
Now, balafon.
Balafon, the mother of the xylophone, the mother of the vibraphone. The original balafon is African. Huge like this. They play with mallets. Mm-hmm. The whole family was playing this instrument. The grandfather, the son, the grandson were all playing this music together. Okay? So I'm watching them again. Wow. Why Africa is so powerful? Because everything is polyrhythm. So like when you go to an African circus, they gotta do what they do according to the rhythms of the drums. You know, some other stuff. So me and Scobie, we were together. Again, first time in Africa, watching everything again. And we're watching this old guy. And he's dancing. They're playing this rhythm. Eric, he jumped up in the air, spun like this, landed on his head, and kept spinning. I said, Scobie, do you see what I see? You see what I see? Yeah. Another time, they had a guy, a pole, just a pole, way, way up in the air. Mm-hmm. He climbed this pole, again, the rhythms, certain music for that climbing the pole. Mm-hmm. You get to the top of the pole and spin on his stomach on the pole like this. Mm-hmm.
What message would you have to say to those who have their own dream about life, music, and moving forward?
The key is first, as the ancient Egyptians say, know thyself, know yourself. Love your ancestors. Forget about today. I mean, you function today, of course, but take time out for your ancestors. Stop and use your imagination. If it was you in that boat, because when they brought us in those chains in that boat, they were making music. On that boat in slavery coming over. because we are musical people. Right? So I tell them when they start to study their own heritage, great-great-great-grandma, great-great-grandpa, going back to that, study African civilization, they will have a wiser view of the world. To understand why we've been put on the bottom of the pile. Because everywhere I go in the world, the black people are always on the bottom. How did that happen? When we were on top, we were the first. But the old people say it's the law of gravity. So whoever's on top is eventually going to go to the bottom. And we've had over 10,000 years of civilization. And Europe and America are babies, and they're already crumbling. Because they got away from spiritual life. They got away from respect. They got away from life itself. You know. So when young people do that, whether you're a musician or architect or historian or whatnot, I learned by just reading books and hanging out with the old folks. Max Roach, you know, Max Roach would say to me, Max would say, hey Randy, you understand what I do? Listen to Baby Dodge. Listen what Baby Dodge were doing way back then. Listen. Marshall Stern said, listen to them old piano players. Listen to Jimmy Yancey. Listen to them people. Listen to Fats. Now, usually, oh man, I got to do my thing like today. This is the latest stuff. Then when you deal with our ancestors, going back to the motherland itself, you just mind its problem. Every African American has to go to Africa. That's our true home. And when you discover the traditional way of life, you can understand them black-eyed peas and fried chicken and barbecue and cassava and yams in food. The way we cook food is pure African. European men cook food like that. But we kept that memory, what the Egyptians called turath, which means you keep that ancestral memory. So I can sit here and go back 5,000 years ago.
Now you and I and Max Roach and was it Cecil Payne? We all went to boys' high school.
And Ray Copeland.
And Ray Copeland.
And Duke Jordan.
And Duke Jordan. Now we all went to boys' high school.
Yes, sir.
And for those viewers who don't know what that was about, I know for me, I remember when I was little, you fellas lived like about 1.5 miles from me. Because you were in Bed-Stuy, I was in downtown Brooklyn.
Okay.
But the music I was hearing on the radio was bebop music.
Okay.
And the cats, Max Roach was playing all that bebop. He's playing all that bebop. And now, when you guys went to school, and you know how Max Roach, he was always dressed well, very intelligent.
Very important.
And you know what? When I was there, he was, of course you guys were before me, but even when I got there, we did the same thing. We dressed to the T every day. We were great students. And it was just a lot of respect and a lot of talent.
Yes, sir.
And we came up around that.
You grow up with people like that, you know, so idols. Duke Ellington kept an orchestra for 45 years.
Wow.
You can't keep a trio going for 1 week.
You got that right. Oh my goodness, man.
And spreading all his music, Black, Brown, and Beige, was late 1930s. All Duke's music was about African American people, or African people, or Caribbean people. He honored a Buddy Bolden, to a Louis Armstrong, to a John Coltrane, to a Stuff Smith, to a Mahalia Jackson. Duke was the total package. And the man we just honored yesterday, James Reese Europe, who was the original guy. This guy did Carnegie Hall in 1913 with 150 musicians. The first, what they called Negro Symphony Orchestra, with 10 pianos in 1913. Wow. He was the one that made us professional. The local unions wouldn't touch black people. He formed the first African American union. He developed 7 orchestras that could play any kind of music. Because in those days, the very rich people in America, they were cultured people. So they would play for society and that type of stuff. 7 orchestras play any kind of music. Yeah. formed a clef club so African people could come to see each other, meet each other, exchange songs. And we had one of those clubs in Brooklyn, which has been forgotten about. And unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the club, but it was a black musicians club on Schenectady Avenue, Fulton Street. And there was one also in Harlem, all come out James Reed's Europe. Musicians, we have to have our own organizations. Today, we just become individuals. We don't need nothing. Because in those days, we would get together to resist. But getting back to the club in Brooklyn, in this club, they would have a pool table, a round table playing cards, a blackboard, and a telephone. So when Count Basie's in town and a few of his guys are laid off, they would come to the club. Or they would come to the club in Harlem. So we young people could go up there and meet the older musicians and exchange songs and whatnot. Because this is an organization of African American people, musicians, okay? And so we had an opportunity. Hey, boy, you play piano? You're gonna take that key, make sure you get $2. Don't take $1. They told us about the music, told us about those big bands, what they had to go through and travel in the South. And we learned the history of African American music. We had our own clubs. I was so inspired by that. In 1961, we formed the African American Musicians Society. We formed an African American Society group. We only stayed together 1 year because I'm not an organizer for that, but there was a need. And we would get together, Melvin Liston, Louis Brown, John Handy, Sadiq Hakeem, Nadi Kamara, and what we would do, we would give rent parties. And we would call anybody in the so-called jazz world to give us some money to strengthen our organization. We were the first ones to put anti-discrimination clause in 802 union contracts. Before that, it didn't exist. Even before that, black people couldn't join 802, you see. And for our speakers in 1961, we had John Henry Clark, historian, and we had A. Philip Randolph, to teach us about labor rights. See?
He was the president of the
Sleeping Porters.
Yeah, sleeping car porters.
Exactly.
Union. Wasn't that the first black union in America?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had him as a speaker at Reverend Weston's church in Harlem. Because we tried to maintain the tradition of James Reed's Europe. Musicians, we had to have our own clubs. Max Roach, the last of us, was the chess club on Gates Avenue. Now we had our own club where we go there and play chess. But after that, everything stopped. And my wife and I played Buffalo, New York, and Buffalo, New York as one of the last of the traditional African American musicians clubs in Buffalo. To the day we completely disowned that because there's no unity. And when I try to tell the young people the power of music, when you create music that a 3-year-old can understand and a 100-year-old can understand. We don't know what you mean by music for the young, which is what's happened today. That only separates us. But everything I write is for all the ages of black people. Because I write something, grandma better be happy. She ain't happy, I ain't playing right. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's the key. We got a great, rich heritage of African people. Go back. That's the one thing the powers that be, they don't want us to go back. They want us to forget about our old people.
And you know, people may not know this about you, Randy, that you actually donated to the schools here in New York City documentary DVDs about music, about your travels around the world, about culture, and so on. And the schools are benefiting right now. I mean, you've had an impact in the music world, in the world of education, in life for people in general, to have a perspective about what am I doing here? What is life all about? Well, they can listen to Dr. Randy Weston and really find out. Just like I've known all the time, but I'm right now I'm getting a lesson. This is a lesson for me, and I got to tell you, I got alphabets and degrees, but it's not an education like you get right here.
Yeah, because look at the people that I follow. Max Rhodes, genius. Max Rhodes would say, hey, this is the way Joe Jones did it. I heard Chano Pozo in Max Roach's house, the great African-Cuban drummer, in Max's house. All those people taught me, listen to the old people, because we may play more notes, but they get that spirit. And plus, you got to be able to make people dance. So when I play solo piano, at the same time, I got to make you dance to solo piano. Because with African people, dance and music are one and the same. But in the Second World War, they closed down all the ballrooms because they put a 20% tax on places to dance. So we became separated. Because when we grew up, we played dances. With Dizzy, if Duke came to the Savoy Ballroom, he had some new music. They had the best dancers at the Savoy Ballroom to create a dance to go with the new music. But the music got separated from the dance, and that's where we lost contact with African American people. They lost it. Now to realize, again, this music is the classical music of America. So being very patriotic, you really study the history of those ham bones and knives and fork. Don't be for them people. Don't be us. The first rapper, Louis Armstrong. How they gonna out-rap Louis? He's a foundation. Just like me, but I hear Monk, I hear people. That's my foundation. So I learned from the masters, man. That's I'm lightweight kidding people, because they did something never happened before. Before Duke Ellington, nothing ever happened like that before. But all of us, we got all that stuff to lay down on. Yeah, take some Earl Hine, take a little bit of Earl Garner, take a little bit of Nat Cole, a little bit of Africa. But imagine creating something that never happened before. I'm totally amazed, and always will be. And respectful for what our ancestors have given us. So that's what I tell young people. Go back, study your history, you realize we come from greatness. And it's because we come from greatness, that's why we're able to do what we do. We take anything and make music.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it first, right here, Dr. Randy Weston. That's an education for you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
God bless you.
You're so important to document us.
Absolutely.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah.